Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar hosted by the Hive. Today we are going to talk about Radarbase, a platform for collecting data from wearable devices that the Hive has developed together with collaborators. First of all, thank you very much for joining us, whether you're watching us live or if you're watching us after the live stream is over. It's very good. It's great to have you here. And I'd like to encourage you to ask questions. Any questions you have, technical, philosophical, anything, remarks, criticism, anything you want to share with us, please post it. You can post your questions in the box on the YouTube page of the video. The box is on the right side of the screen. And the most exciting part of having these webinars is actually communicating with you guys, with the audience. So please feel free to interact with us. So today we're going to talk about Radarbase. Together with me here is my colleague, Joris Borghoff. Hope I pronounced it correctly.
Okay.
He is my colleague here at the Hive, one of our senior developers, and one of the main developers of the Radarbase platform. Hi, Joris.
Hi.
Great.
Thanks for having me here.
Thank you for coming here. Great to have you here.
Yeah, so
Radarbase.
Radarbase.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so Radarbase is something we have been preparing for a long time.
Is it launched already?
It's just launched.
It is just launched.
I think today the website was officially launched.
Okay.
And officially part of the Hive solutions as well.
So radarbase.org, also thehive.nl/radarbase. You can find the website and the information about the website and the platform over there.
Yep.
Great, congratulations on the launching.
Thanks.
So it's a platform that has something to do with wearables. We're going to figure out what exactly later. But let me first ask you, why wearables? Why is the Hive involved with wearable devices, wearable data? Why did we find it interesting in the first place?
Right. So, before we started on this, we got questions from pharmaceutical companies, but also from universities, researchers dealing with patients or participants. And they really want to know how patients and participants are doing in their trials, so for clinical trials, but also in clinical practice. And it turns out that first of all, patients don't reliably report what they do or what they encountered. So for example, we have epilepsy patients, and they would, it's very important to know how many epileptic seizures they have, also to adjust drug use. But they can't reliably report the number of seizures they have in a day. So automatically detecting the number of seizures really makes a system more reliable. It also makes the data more useful for research because it's objectively measured how a patient is doing. That's one part from the research, and from the clinical practice, it's also that patients will usually not often speak to their doctor, maybe once in a few months. And in the meantime, a lot can change. So having using wearable data, you can in between see how the patient's doing and maybe plan an earlier intervention. And at least the doctor can see at the end of these few months how the patient has done in the last few months.
Yeah. Okay, and before we start our conversation about the platform, just to make sure we have a reference point. So you mentioned wearable devices, but the field is quite new, and I know that people say wearables, wearable devices, sensors, wearable sensors. Let's maybe define what we mean when we say wearable device or sensor.
Right. So when we talk about wearables, we talk about devices that you can wear, like it can be a smartwatch, it can be a chest strap. There's also body scales or blood pressure monitors. And each of those we call a wearable. And usually those wearables will have multiple sensors. So a smartwatch might have a blood pressure volume a monitor, an acceleration sensor, and it could also have a gyroscope. So those are the individual sensors that are embedded in the wearable.
Okay, so the wearable or the device is the actual machine, the apparatus, and then the sensor is the thing that measures something, a parameter.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then usually a wearable on its own is not much use. You want to get the data out of it. So you can do that either. Sometimes it can make a direct connection to a host, to a server, but often it will make a connection to, for example, your phone, and then the phone can relay the data to a server. And in some cases, people also place Internet of Things hubs in a home, for example, and then the wearable can relay the data to that hub instead. And for all those use cases, you need some platform to gather that data and aggregate it, and also to combine it.
And that's where the radar base comes in.
Exactly, yes.
But before we go into radar base, can you tell me what was your first experience working with wearable data, your first project maybe here at the Hive?
Right, so we started with the Radar CNS project, which was a collaboration between a lot of partners. We mainly talk to King's College London now and Janssen. But there's a lot of partners involved in this.
You can see them all on the slide.
Exactly. Also device makers, research institutes. And for this project, we really had to find out what was a useful way of collecting all this wearable data. And in the end, we ended up with a open source solution. So we really wanted to be able to share what we did in this project, to collect data from a lot of different device types.
Yeah.
And because the consortium is large, and also the interests are diverse, we also wanted a pluggable system. So different institutes can contribute different parts to different parts of the system.
And Radar CNS, as far as I know, that's an IMI project. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So this is actually a public-private partnership. It's a combination of pharma companies and also the EU. And they mainly fund pre-competitive projects. So in this case, the software would be useful for multiple pharma companies. It's a general piece of software.
Yeah. And IMI stands for?
Innovative Medicines Initiative.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Radar CNS started as a project that was focused or narrowed to the field of CNS, of central nervous system diseases.
Right.
But then the idea of having that platform outside of the context of CNS and making it as independent platform that people can use for other diseases, for example, was the basis of Radar Base. Is that correct? Exactly.
So, and for Radar CNS, we study epilepsy, MS, and depression. But very early on, we also got questions, can we do general clinical trials with this? Can we do maybe Alzheimer's disease modeling or Parkinson's disease? Wearable data is interesting for a lot of disease areas where you want to monitor your patients very regularly. So it has a very wide applicability.
Okay, so let's just get to Radar Base. That's why we're here today. Maybe we can start with discussing it a little bit in general. So maybe you could show us the architecture and walk us through it. And then we'll zoom into some details.
Right.
But I see that first of all you have the homepage of Radarbase,
Yeah.
radarbase.org. We're very proud of it.
Yeah, so we just launched this. It has multiple parts as well. So there's a wiki for technical documentation, but there's also information on how to get involved. Yeah, we just transitioned from Radar CNS to Radarbase. So yeah, we really hope to get some community effort going here.
Yeah. And Radarbase, was that our initiative, or do we have any major partners involved?
Yeah, I think at least KCL, King's College London, is playing a major part in transitioning to Radarbase as well. But we're trying to involve as many of the partners of Radar CNS that are interested to come join this as well. And in upcoming projects, we really want to build upon this as well. So we hope to attract new partners to this as well. Yeah.
So please go to radarbase.org, go to our GitHub page, go to the wiki page, and check it out. We really hope to get some traction to this platform. Let's have a look at the platform. Maybe you can first just walk us briefly, sort of in general terms, through the whole layout, through the whole architecture, and then we can zoom in different parts.
Yeah. Yeah, so on the left side, you see the data sources. So this is what I just talked about, the wearables. And those will transmit the data to our central system, backend system. It's called the core here.
And I can also see device middleware. That's the phone, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So as I said before, the wearable will need some means of transmitting the data to our system. So usually that will be an Android phone. But in one of the hospitals, we also have just a small device sitting next to the patient's bed. Yeah, so that could be multiple things.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the middle, it's both data streaming and data storage. We'll come to that later as well. And data visualization on the right side. That's quite important for researchers to see how the data collection is going, and possibly also for monitoring individual patients.
Yeah.
Yeah, and apps. Of course, in the end, you also want to do some data analysis on the data. So that's also that's what we actually do this for.
And just to make it absolutely clear, so the expertise of the Hive, where does it lie? It's not in the analytics, is it?
No, so we focus really on getting a very robust system for data collection.
Yeah.
And then we leave it to clinical researchers to develop algorithms based on the data that comes in. Of course, when they have a good algorithm, they can contribute that back to the platform and maybe even embed it inside the platform.
Yeah.
For example, for early warning systems.
Okay. Good. Now that we have the overview of the whole system, maybe we can first start with looking at the devices. I actually have a few questions there. So, okay, so we see a couple of devices here. Are these all the devices that are supported?
Well, we also support phones. I think since then we also support the Emotion Pharos device. Yeah, but also the wearables that are listed here. Yeah, so we support a range of devices. And most of those, they work via the device middleware. So they work via the Android phone. They just connect to the phone. And some of them, like the Fitbits, they don't provide an API for directly talking to the Fitbits, but instead they will send all their data to a third-party API, so to their Fitbit cloud.
Okay.
And in that case, we can't use the middleware, but instead we just read the data that Fitbit has sent to its own Fitbit cloud.
Okay, to that third-party API.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now you have a few on the slide. You mentioned a few extra devices. What if I have a device that's not supported by Radar Base at the moment? Can I implement it somehow? Can I use it?
Right. Yeah. So the most important thing is the cooperation of the device producer, because in the end they have to write some communication protocol so that you can actually talk to the phone. But if you have that, then it's quite straightforward to write a plugin for our app. So yeah, if you have a very well documented API from the producer, it can take a week. If you have to do more work, maybe also implement a protocol yourself, then it could take a month. But in principle, it's not a big hurdle to go through.
So could you say that in principle, any device can be used with Radar Base, can be integrated with Radar Base?
In principle, yes. But as long as they have some streaming capability, so that they need to be able to come online in some way.
Yeah, you need to be able to actually get the data
exactly
from them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is also, it's the most useful method for researchers as well, because there are wearables that don't have any connectivity, but then researchers have to go to participants every few days to upload the data.
Yeah.
Which is just quite inconvenient for most settings.
Yeah, I see.
Yep.
And so I'm aware that there are basically more consumer-oriented devices. You call them consumer-grade devices, like Fitbit.
Right.
And there are more devices that are applied in hospitals, in medical area. So they are medical-grade devices. Yeah. Do you support both?
We do support both. There are some differences. Consumer-grade devices will usually not send very granular data, but just the data that's needed, for example, to say steps per day. Whereas most researchers, they're really interested in sub-second acceleration. On the other hand, they do have bigger production lines. So medical grade devices, you might just get a few. You might not always get the same quality sensors between products. And since we've started, there has been a lot of products created, but there's also been some products that have been discontinued. And especially for smaller product lines, that's a problem, because then you implement a plugin and then the device no longer exists.
Has it actually ever happened to you in particular that you have developed a plugin for a device, and when the development was over, the device has been taken off the market?
Unfortunately, yes. Actually, one of them is on there. It's the Pebble 2. This is indeed it's actually consumer grade.
Okay.
But they were acquired by Fitbit, so they are no longer made.
Okay.
So this can definitely happen. So it's really useful to be able to create another plugin for another device when needed.
And why these devices? How were these devices selected?
Well, some of them, like the Apache E4, they have they supposedly have very high quality sensors, but they're quite expensive and they weren't that easy to use in our experience. On the other hand, the Fitbit is quite easy to use, but the sensors are less granular. So there's always a trade-off. I think we've evaluated about 100 devices over the course of the project. But as I said, there's new devices coming on the market very often. So it's very flexible market. Yeah.
Okay, so I do have a question to our audience. What about you? In your research or in your medical practice, in your clinical questions, do you prefer to use consumer-grade wearable devices, or do you prefer to use medical-grade wearable devices? And maybe you could tell us your opinion about that. It would be great to discuss that in more detail. But we'll move on from the device selection and from getting the data from the devices to the core of the platform, and that's the storage and the databases.
Right. So, yeah, when the data comes in, it comes in via the REST proxy. So that's where the data is gathered. And then it's sent to Apache Kafka. And Apache Kafka is a method of streaming records. So it's a scalable and reliable system that basically distributes messages throughout the system and also allows analysis on it. So what we do is, on the one hand, we store all the raw data that comes in HDFS. HDFS Hadoop file system is, again, it's a scalable system. So you can also, if you gather a lot of data, distribute it over multiple servers. And it's reliable as well. On the other hand, we do real-time analytics. So for some of the measures like battery level, we're interested in how the battery level deteriorates for different devices. In a hospital setting, you can even, in the meantime, charge one of the devices if it turns out that the battery level is low. But we also look for devices that disconnect. So maybe we see that one of the participants is not gathering any device from their watch, and then we can send them a message. Is something wrong with your watch, or can we help you?
And you can perhaps also set up a notification system for the clinician or the researcher responsible for that patient, so that when I'm a clinician and one of the patients that I'm following, that I'm in charge of, has his or her device disconnected, I get a message as well saying, hey, this guy, his phone has lost the connection, so I should do something about it.
Exactly. So that's indeed already implemented. One of the things we're interested in, but which we're working on, is if once the analysts find some early warning system or warning criteria, we could also send additional warnings based on, for example, heart rate or blood pressure.
Yeah.
One of the other things we do, because the streams that the sensors send are very granular, so sub-second, but for graphical interfaces, you should usually want something on a second or hour basis. So we also aggregate all the data in real time, and we send that to a MongoDB hot storage. And stored there, it can be queried by the REST API, which is then available for any clients that we make.
Okay, we have a question from the audience that's great to see. The question is coming from Vincent. Do you foresee the option of file-based data analytics? For example, one file upload per recording day. I think this would help to align pharmaceutical research with epidemiological research. Vincent, thank you for your question. Joris, what do you think about this?
Yeah, actually it's something we do, which I didn't depict it in the picture, but it's something we already do, and then I think we now store it on an hour basis, but indeed a day basis is also possible. It's one of the configuration settings. So indeed, analysts, they usually want some file-based access. Our initial vision was to allow access to the Hadoop file system so that they could do big data analytics. But in practice, it turned out that many analysts just want chunks of the data to analyze locally. So we also provide that, yeah.
So you're saying that it wouldn't be very practical right now, for example, to have a Python client or an R client connected directly to the storage, because that's not what people do. People actually prefer to have a file with an extraction of some time period that they can analyze and then upload into R or Python and run their scripts on it.
Exactly. So when we started, we envisioned that people would prefer a client, But
Mhm.
in fact, many analysts prefer just having a local file.
Okay.
So that's what we now do.
Okay, I see. But so we were talking about hot and cold storage. So you use two different types of databases, is that correct? You use HDFS, and the other one, which one is the other one?
MongoDB, yeah.
And yeah?
Yeah. So both are meant to be scalable, but on the MongoDB database, we can also do some indexing, so you can search or select time periods for someone to view. But there we don't store all the data, just because it's less suitable for big data analytics that you would typically want to do on this raw data. Yeah, whereas HDFS, you can't really do fast searches unless you put some other system on top of it.
I see. And why did you choose those two particular ones?
In both cases, they're scalable and tend to be reliable. For MongoDB, it was also very easy that they allowed JSON storage. So all of the data that we put in our system, we actually encoded with the schema library, which is on the top left, using Avro. So we actually put a schema on all of the data that comes in. So for acceleration, that would be, for example, we say beforehand will have the X, Y, Z coordinates, and then both the wearable data will know that it needs to provide those X, Y, Z, and also the clients know that they can always expect those X, Y, Z coordinates. And we actually, we use JSON then to represent that data. So then MongoDB is a natural fit for that.
I see. And now I think we're coming to the most visually interesting part. That's, of course, the output. So you have two databases, two different types of data. Great. How can I actually get it? Do I receive pictures or dashboards or text files as a researcher, as a clinician who just wants to see the data of my patients?
Right. Yeah, so what we're developing now is a dashboard. So there you can see an overview of, first of all, how much data was collected by the patients, if they're still sending data at the moment, or maybe if you need to talk to them and ask them to reconnect their wearable. But also to do some basic visual analytics, just to take a look at what the heart rate was the last 2 days. Yeah, and this is meant mainly for researchers that collect data to see if the data that's collected is sensible. But as I said before, in the end, they want to download all the raw data and do the full analysis on that.
And that's also possible
Yeah, definitely.
to download like a CSV file or a text file.
Exactly, yeah.
And about the dashboard, are you planning to develop it further? For example, to show more different parameters, variables?
It is meant to be extensible. So also if you would develop another wearable plugin, you could plug that into the dashboard as well. That's the idea behind it. But I think, what we really want to expand on is also just the way that you download the data.
Okay.
So make it easier to download these chunks of data and not. Right now, you have to do some manual downloads, and it would be nice to put that into an interface as well. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And what about customers that you have for the platform? I'm not sure if you already have customers for Radar Base per se, because it just recently been launched. But I'm sure you had some sort of user groups in mind when you were developing this. So I understand you mentioned multiple times clinicians and researchers.
Right.
What about patients?
Right. So the patients in this story, I think they're more involved with those clinicians and researchers. So they will have to install an app to download the wearable data and also to scan a code so that they're connected to the system. But other than that, we're not involved much in with the patients themselves. So that would be more if you deploy the system somewhere, then you really need to think about the onboarding of patients, about the protocol, about what data you want to collect.
Yeah, but so patients do not see, for example, the dashboards.
No, in principle not. Especially for trials, researchers don't want to interfere with how the patients behave.
Yeah.
Because that would change the outcome or change the data
Yeah.
as well.
Are you aware actually of any discussions in that area? Because I can imagine some people would say, yeah, but that's patient data, and as a patient, I have a right to see my data. And then some would say, that's true, but if we show you how you behave, then it might actually change your behavior.
Yeah, I know there have been discussions. I think for clinical research, it's quite accepted that people don't see their data. I think for clinical practice, it would be a different story because their patients might actually be helped by seeing how they behave and what they do. Also, I've talked to someone who thought maybe of crowdsourcing this. So to say, well, we'll just ask a lot of people to install this and we can make some crowdsourced version of this. In that case also, I think you can't really deny someone their own data.
Yeah.
So no, that would definitely be part in that scenario. But for now, I think we've been working mostly with researchers directly.
Yeah.
In that case, it's not used that way.
Yeah. And of course, we shouldn't forget about another user group, and that's software developers. They're perhaps not the user group per se that would use the output of the platform, but they hopefully are your future collaborators, right? Contributors to the platform. So the platform is open source. That means you most probably have a GitHub page, and everything is out there available for you guys, for developers who are interested in the platform, to have a look and contribute.
Right. Yeah. So definitely all of the code of Radarbase is on GitHub repos. All these repos are public, so people can definitely contribute to this. Also, if they create a new plugin, we're definitely welcoming any additions to that system. I think for developers, what's also a nice point is that they can contribute to this, make a pull request, and if we then accept it, then their code comes in the main line. And then they can also just take advantage of any features that come after they contributed to the source. Yeah, what I should also note is that everything is licensed under Apache 2. So if producers are not comfortable with publishing their plugin, but maybe they are willing to make it available as a binary file, so not the source, but just the application, then that's definitely possible as well, because Apache allows, basically using closed source with open source systems. Yeah, and apart from the GitHub repos, there's also a wiki, which contains documentation on most of these repositories, the functions of the different parts of the system. So, yeah, if any developers want to take a look, then I hope they can find their way.
Coming back to where we were just discussing open source and the open source solutions in the context of such a platform. I can imagine that it would be challenging for people from the medical field, clinicians, to actually open up to the idea of using open source solutions for working with patient data. What's your experience? Have you seen any resentment? And maybe there are some most frequently asked questions that you had to answer, and you could share with us.
So I've definitely seen some hesitation. So one of them is well, should we share what we're doing? And I think for us, that's actually really important, because we want new device makers to be welcome on this system, and we don't want to close it up and just keep our own little island. But I've also heard questions as is it not going to maybe open up the data that I collect? Well, open source does not mean open data. So the data that you collect is definitely private. The repository or the code that we make is also made with security in mind and privacy in mind. So we do keep all the data secure and private. So in that sense, I don't see a big worry, but we do get questions about from organizations that are not used to using open source that often.
And how do you make sure that the data is secure and that nothing is compromised?
So one of the things we had in mind when we started already was privacy. So we make sure that we don't even collect any identifiable information. So any data that could directly identify someone will either be hashed or changed somewhat. So for example, we do collect some location data, but not to where someone is, but just how far they travel. So you might know on a single day that someone traveled 5 kilometers, but you won't be able to know where that person actually went.
Yeah. So if I'm in Paris or in Berlin, it doesn't matter. You'll never know that. You'll only know that from that location in that city. I walked for 300 meters straight and then turned left.
Exactly. Yeah, so with that in mind, we also designed our user authentication to not contain identifiable information. So we only use unique identifiers for the whole system, and then it's up to the researchers to write an integration with another system that actually keeps track of email addresses and names and such. We actually have written one integration like that with RedCap. So this is a CRF that just tracks patients.
What does CRF stand for?
Sorry. Sorry. No.
Okay. But that's essentially a system that is used to get access to the actually sensitive data.
Exactly.
And the idea is that that system is completely outside of RadarBase. So RadarBase does not have to do anything with any sensitive identifiable information.
Right.
So even if something happens to RadarBase, nothing will be compromised, and the patient data is still completely secure within your own environment, within your hospital or your company.
Exactly.
And not compromised.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, so these are two completely different systems, and then the data is all anonymized, and that's the way we make sure it is essentially safe and secure.
Exactly. Yeah, and this also, if the intention is in the end to make part of your data public, or publish part of the data, that will also make it easier because it's already anonymized.
Yeah.
By design.
Yeah, I see. Okay, I see that we have another question, and it's actually a question from our CEO, Kees van Bokhoven. Is the platform validated, and how does that work with open source? Thank you for your question, Kees. Joris, can you tell us a bit about it? First of all, is it validated, the platform?
So the platform as published on GitHub and in RadarBase is not validated as such. It has been validated in the context of one of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's how you should see it. Just as radar-based doesn't really do patient enrollment, that's left up to the researchers or the organization that uses it. We think that also the validation should be done as part of the context of that organization. Yes, so there's already a research institute that has gone through that process, and that has gone fine.
And did they have any difficulties or issues or extra difficulties because of the open source nature of Radar?
I would say it doesn't really affect the validation, just because the validation is really about what security protocols are in place, how does it work, what do you do when there's a failure somewhere. And that can all be done with open source software, just like with closed source software. So we don't see an issue there.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that answers the question. We have that question quite a lot recently about the open source nature, and indeed if that's possible to use with secure data, etc. So I hope that we covered it. And once again, the key message is open source does not mean open data. That only means open source and nothing else, essentially. So it only brings you benefits, such as you can use it by yourself. You're not locked into one particular provider. These are all the benefits that you can get from it. Now that basically the platform is developed, I'm wondering, so we covered the part of open source. It can be challenging sometimes to explain it to people, etc. But I can imagine there were more challenges and difficulties on the way. So if you think about the whole process of development, what would you say were the biggest issues in the development process?
So I think one of our biggest issues was getting and involving the wearables and the wearable producers. So collecting data like this, it only works if the producers also want to enable that wearable to actually send data somewhere. So in some cases, the hardware is simply not fit, so it is not able to transmit any data. You need to plug it into a system before you can extract it. But in other cases, they have their own proprietary protocol, which no one else is allowed to use. Or they have a protocol which is obfuscated, and they don't really tell you how you're able to use it. So I think that is a big challenge. As soon as device producers are interested in opening up the data that they provide, it's actually quite easy to integrate it in the system. Yeah, so I think that was one of our biggest challenges, getting the device producers involved.
And how was that working with Android in your experience?
So mostly Android is quite an open system, so you can actually gather a lot of data using it. It is, of course, meant for consumers. It's not meant as a medical wearable data collection platform. So you would get some restrictions, maybe that you cannot use too much memory or you cannot use too much processing power to actually gather the data. And with some wearables, that's a bit problematic because they send perhaps 46 or 64 records per second. And in that case, you do need some processing power to actually process that. So, yeah, working around that, I think that has been a challenge in Android. But now I think we're at a stage that we have, pretty solid base to continue forward on.
And have you already had a chance to test Radar in an actual real clinical trial?
Right. So Actually, one of the first trials we got involved with was in the epilepsy study in radar CNS at the Freiburg Hospital. And in that case, they were comparing EEG data, which was just gathered with a regular EEG installation in the hospital. Some video data, so patients were also monitored to see if they actually had a seizure or not. And then that was combined with wearable data, so with Apache Kafka and with BioVotion. And and that trial is now running. So we've had, I think now, at least 10 patients, but I think already tens of patients, and that that has been working well. Of course, with the first trial, you find out the first caveats with a system like this, but the data collection is going quite well right now.
But was there anything, sort of a big thing that you had to fix after this first experience of the first clinical trial? Anything that you didn't foresee?
I think that was mostly on the hardware side. So the E4 would sometimes disconnect from our hub.
But that was then the problem of the E4, or was that the problem of the hub, or?
Both sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's mostly hardware problems that are the real problem, because then you need to get someone on site to fix it.
Yeah.
Whereas software problem, you can solve in software, redeploy it, and we're done.
And do it remotely. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Now that we only have actually a few minutes left, I would like to ask you about the future of RadarBase. We've discussed the development process, some ongoing initiatives like the clinical studies. But if I ask you, where do you see RadarBase in 3 to 5 years? Where would you like to see it?
Right.
What would you tell me?
So, first of all, we've already started a bit of a community around this, but I'd really like to see that community grow. As I said before, device producers, those are key in this whole thing. So I'd really like them to participate in this as well, and perhaps add some plugins to the system as well.
Device producers, if you are looking, if you are listening, if you're with us, please collaborate, cooperate.
Yes. And other than that, I hope we'll have some other fantastic projects with this system. I think, we have a nice system in place now, so let's use it in more places.
Yeah, definitely. I actually see that we have another question. I think it's another question from Vincent, isn't it? The question is, what would be the best way for plugin developers to reach out to candidate users? Tailoring open source plugin to user needs in exchange for some form of payment could be attractive. So what would be the best way for the developers of plugins to reach out to candidate users? Thank you for your question, Vincent. Joris, what do you think?
Well, I think first of all, getting it inside RadarBase will increase your user base a lot, because as soon as you have this plugin in place, it will be much easier for other people to use it. And then for device producers, it can also be beneficial, because they'll be able to easily sell their product without having to also sell a whole or make a whole data gathering platform, because the data gathering platform is there. So I think that can be a real benefit for device producers to to have the data platform ready when users ask for it.
Okay. Vincent, I hope this answers your question. Before we finish, Joris, I just want to I have one more question that I think is really interesting. So I understand about the future, the community, more projects, but do you see any obstacles or any dangers in the path of Radar Base? Anything that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think what we should be wary for is that we create too many islands. So if all research institutes or pharma companies develop their own system, and then also device producers start developing their own systems, you really get some lock-in, so you won't be able to export data from one system to the other. It will be hard to compare data between systems. So I think that would be a big challenge in the future to avoid this partitioning of the community.
Yeah, and we just try to explain to you in the past hour how that's not beneficial and how actually having one system in place, such as Radar Base, hopefully that will be the system, how it's beneficial for you, for all of us, for researchers, for clinicians, how it's interesting for developers to contribute, and also beneficial and well, who knows, maybe at some point also for patients. Maybe we'll get even more involved with the patients. Unfortunately, it's been a very interesting hour of discussion about Radar Base, but unfortunately the hour is almost over. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm afraid we'll have to say goodbye to you guys, to our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for watching, whether you are doing it now with us live or whether you are doing it later. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate your questions. It's great. It's always very exciting to see that you are communicating with us, interacting, and to be able to reply directly back. Thank you very much, Joris, for joining me here today, for spending some of your time not busy developing Radar Base, but actually talking about it to us.
Yep.
And I wish you and the rest of the development team of Radar Base, of course, all the luck, all the best of luck with making a great community, making it broader, expanding, and getting some exciting projects.
Yeah, thanks for the interview.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'll make sure that we make the next webinar just as interesting and full of interesting things and knowledge you can learn for you, hopefully next month. And for now, have a nice day or evening whenever you're watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.